Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa, science advisor Matt Moniz. Stephanie Burke's down in Tennessee, so she won't be with us tonight. But we are here with you to talk about the paranormal, as we will be pretty much each and every week now going forward, because our paranormal Christmas is over. All the fun stuff that we've been doing, it's all over. It's all done. Now we're just back in the studio, which is, you know, we enjoy that too, but it's not the same as being out there and meeting the people, which we've been doing a bunch of different stuff. I haven't even asked you, Matt, how was the Paroween event a couple weeks ago?
That was pretty action-packed. We had a lot of people show up and a lot of good guests on Skype. We're actually going to be probably looking for a slightly bigger venue next time.
Where was it this year?
It was at the Seaport Inn.
Okay, I don't know if I'm familiar with that.
I believe it's basically...
I pretty much know the Hawthorne Hotel in Salem, and that's it.
Yeah. It's right on the waterfront, but we had two separate sections, and we're looking for a place that can hold a little bit more people, and where we can put the vendors inside with the people. It's just...
Would you make them go outside?
No, there's another section that was
cold.
It wasn't that bad that
weekend. We walked. I was a couple miles away from you.
Yeah,
at the Parson Barnard house, and we walked to the cemetery that's down the street from there, and I didn't even have a jacket on, so it wasn't that bad. Not like last night was, and tonight too.
Yeah,
both very cold. I wonder how many people are here for Comic-Con, Matt Costa, that are like, "Oh, is it always this cold in New England?" Right. No, it's like usually not this cold, but it is tonight. So it's a good night to, you know, maybe build a fire in the fireplace, grab a blanket, lay on the couch, put on Spooky Southcoast on your TV through YouTube. If you have a smart TV, or now even if you have a Comcast Xfinity cable box, the Comcast box now has the YouTube app as one of the apps that you can find in your menu there. If you just search your app or hit your little voice remote button and say YouTube, then you'll be able to go right to the YouTube app on your cable box, and then just search for Spooky Southcoast. You will find the live Spooky Southcoast video stream. And this is kind of a different setup for us, because we're going with, we took all this hard work that Matt Costa has done for Spooky TV over the years, and like really this has been ongoing now for like 5-6 years. He's been building this video extravaganza of a show, and we've now taken this technology and this ability and finally shared it with the rest of the station. So we have now...
Are you sure you want to do that? I've seen some of the other DJs in here.
We have what's like now a permanent rig, though. So we don't have to come in here and set up a whole bunch of stuff anymore. And so there's actually cameras here that will be set up here pretty much all the time. There's a dedicated machine over there just for the video stream. So this is the future, man. This is the future. Watching radio as it happens. And now you'll be able to do it each week. So hopefully this means, too, that if all goes well, and I don't want to curse it, but it's not like coming in here. See, people complain.
That's what people do, yeah.
Let's not pussyfoot around the situation here. If you go into the chat room on Spooky TV before the show starts, we have a great loyal following of people that love to come and watch the show every week and engage in the chat room, but some of them are complainers. Some of them are complaining, "Oh, I can't hear it. Oh, I can't see. What's going on?" Listen, we know that there's problems, and we do the best that we can around it, but it's not like the system is permanently set up every week that we just come in and press a button and go live. It takes installing cameras. It takes installing audio, and as you do that, sometimes things install right, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have them ready and they work, and then when you go live, they crap out on you. And you have to try to fix it on the fly.
Like the computer decides it wants to, install updates on.
All these things that will come into play when we're doing this stream. So the fact that, again, I don't want to bash anybody, because you're great, loyal fans of the show and great, loyal listeners, and viewers, and we appreciate it. But also, like, I know I say this all the time. You're getting the show for free on a Saturday night. It's not like we're charging you any money for us to enjoy this show. So sometimes you're going to have to deal with a few little bugs and a few little issues. But anyway, the long and short of it is that with this new setup now, you shouldn't even have those bugs anymore.
You're going to jinx us.
I know that. As I'm saying it,
at the beginning.
All I can think of in my head as I say this is it's just going to crap out in the middle of me giving the speech. But this will be permanently set up, and used on a daily basis for all the different shows here at WBSM. So it won't be a matter of coming in on Saturday night, hooking things up, having something not work. It'll be constantly being fine-tuned.
It'll be turnkey.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's the plan. And by having it going and having it running, that means that we can focus in instead on doing bigger and better things with it. So just having the baseline of the video streaming of what we've already done, now we can start bringing in more and more little tweaks. And now we can start doing other things that will be unique twists. So if we want to bring in more Skype video, if we wanted to bring in more, YouTube stuff and things like that. So, we'll be able to focus on worrying about all that because the baseline stuff is covered. So this is kind of our first Spooky Southcoast using this studio technology. So far, so good, Matt?
So good.
I mean, it looks great from my end. I still wish we had better lighting in the studio, but we'll work on that.
What, these fluorescent bulbs aren't good enough?
We do have some lights in there. We just never bring them in. But I'm hoping that as they build this, they'll see the value in just like hanging some lights over there. Because they have them in the FM studio.
Yeah.
So hang some LED lights over in the corner so that we can just kind of flood the room with some brighter, whiter light. But I like it. I'm looking at the shot. I like it. And we're gonna the studio is gonna get a redesign. They're working on that. They're actually gonna have the table's going to be facing in a different direction here, and it's going to be more conducive to having guests and interaction and everybody on camera. And
You're just going to jinx everything.
No,
like nothing's ever going to come to fruition because
they're going to spruce all this up. They're going to move the WBSM sign. There's a TV out in the hallway that's going to go right there. It's going to hang on the wall.
Is?
Yeah, they're going to move that sign.
They're probably going to put it on
the sign's going to be over there,
okay.
And then there'll be a TV right here. And then, because I think they were talking about putting the TV over there, but I was like, that's not a good idea because somebody will smash it with the door. I don't know what will happen with this, but we're going to take down all these photos, and we're going to have a clear view into the booth. And Frank's working on a system where the person that's in that booth can actually talk to the people on the air. So Mac,
really?
Yeah, like that's what normally happens in like bigger stations. Yeah. We just don't ever have to worry about that because everybody's kind of working out of the studio. You don't have to actually have people working in an auxiliary studio, but we'll be able to do that. So when Matt has to go and get people on the line, he can go in there and do it and then talk to me in my ear and tell me that they're in there.
Wow.
Fancy stuff.
It's going to be big time stuff.
But that's the thing is like this station is built for what it's needed. And now with all of this new technology, we need to add more things.
Scary part is we were doing this before the station decided wanted to do this.
Well, they're only doing it because we suggested it. All this video stuff, we gave them the idea.
Everything is because of us.
Pretty much. We're fully taking credit for that.
Yeah.
Well, bear in mind we've been here the longest.
Pretty much. I mean, we've been here longer than all the people on WBSM.
Yeah.
Phil was here. And he was all over the place. I mean, Phil's been around forever, but we've been doing this show since before all the hosts were hosting their shows. So, and this was, I don't know. How did we come up with the idea of having to do video streaming in the first place?
I don't know.
I think you brought it up.
Because you saw it on...
I probably saw something.
I think you were like, hey, have you heard of this stick cam thing? And I think you brought it up. And then we started discussing the possibilities of it.
Maybe. And then we stumbled upon a program.
The way things
stuck with it way longer than we should have.
Here's how things usually go with the innovations that we do on this show is either Matt will have an idea and tell me about it, or I'll have an idea and tell Matt about it. But either way, what ends up happening is just me telling Matt to make it happen. So, even if ideas are mine, please understand, none of them would actually ever come to fruition if it wasn't for Matt Costa actually executing those plans. And so that's what I've been telling everybody here at the station. Like, people have come in, oh, hey, Tim, I like that thing that you guys do with the video. I'm like, yeah, talk to Matt. Matt's the guy that does all that. He's the guy that's built all that. And he, obsesses over it and finds ways to do different things. And he blows my mind constantly with it.
I do obsess over it.
You do, but it's in a good way.
It pays, though. You do well with it.
And that's where a lot of our hang-ups come from as well. Is when I screw around with something and I'm like,
yeah, and you're trying to
I'm
innovate.
like, you know what? I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't.
Like
I shouldn't have tried that before the show. I should have tried it after the show.
Like he mentioned to me the other day, not to give away anything that we might be doing here in the future, but he mentioned to me the other day, I think it's possible that when we're doing these camera feeds into this, that we can use your cell phone camera anywhere in the building as long as you're on the network. And my head just went, what do you mean? You mean I can go be across the building and still be? He's like, yeah, I think it'll work. And so he's in here the other night, like actually testing it and making it happen and making it work. See, because I can never leave here. Like if I want to get up and in the middle of the show, I can't.
Sometimes emergencies arise, especially after eating Sonic.
Well, that's basically what's going to happen is if you can make this work, there will be a show where I host it from the bathroom.
Might as well.
Yeah, because I can. Because, I'll be able to. So I will actually do it. I'll actually go into the men's room, maybe the ladies' room because it looks better visually. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll go in there and I'll host the show from the bathroom the entire time. And that way there, when I'm talking to myself in the bathroom, it will actually make sense for once. Mm-hmm. Instead of the usual way. So in just a few moments, we're actually going to class up the show. Instead of talking about talking in the bathroom and all that stuff, we're going to be joined by our guest, Jeffery Kripal, who's going to be joining us to talk about some of his work. Jeffrey's a very interesting guy. He has a very interesting background. He actually is part of the Department of Religion at Rice University. He heads up that department. We're going to be talking to him about about a number of his works, but the latest one being The Supernatural, A New Vision of the Unexplained, which he co-wrote with the legendary Whitley Strieber, who we've had here on the program in the past. And we're going to talk about this with him because this is a book where they're taking a completely new approach and a completely new look at the paranormal. And we've kind of languished in a lot of the same stuff over the last... We've been doing this show now, it'll be 12 years. In January. So, there's been a lot of hang-ups and and sometimes I say, oh, I'm tired of hearing things explained that way. I'm tired of hearing people say, well, we know this to be true, because we don't know any of it to be true. Kind of everything that we are saying, we're taking in good faith based on experience. I mean, last week we were out in the field at an event, at our Mysterious Middleborough event. And when things start to go on, people are looking for their devices, and they're like, well, I don't know why this is happening because I'm not getting anything on the K2 meter. Well, because you probably don't have to get something. Just because we think that if there's a ghost this happens, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen every time, because there's plenty of times when we experience things that stuff doesn't go off, and there's plenty of time when stuff goes off that we don't experience anything. So I think that we take too much stuff at face value and don't really step back and realize, wait a minute, we don't really know anything about this. So if you have something that's right 70% of the time, it seems to be true. If 70% of the time something manifests and you can quantify it with, EMF fluctuation or temperature fluctuation, sure. But that doesn't mean that the other 30% of times that people are experiencing something that doesn't happen, that they're not experiencing something.
Correct.
I mean, I was sitting in the dark in the basement of the Oliver house with no lights on, no devices, anything, and just seeing ridiculous shadow figures, feeling people touching us, cold breezes blowing directly in our face, all these different things that happen that even if the devices were on, who knows if it would have even picked up any of that stuff. So we'll get into all that in just a moment with Jeffery Kripal. I'm going to try and bring him up here because I'm the kind of guy that I like to live by the seat of my pants and not take a break. And just try and do everything on the air. Hello, Jeffery. It's Tim from Spooky Southcoast. How are you? Can you hear us okay? Hold on. Let me make sure I get everything in. What do I got to do? Put it in audition, right? Can you hear us now, Jeffery?
Yeah, I can hear you really well. I assume you don't want video.
No, normally we would, but we didn't have time to set it up, so we're we just got back from a Comic-Con, and I happen to notice that one of your work has to do with superheroes.
Yeah, it does.
I can tell you that some of the ones that we saw today, they might have been heroes, but they weren't so super. Sometimes I look at the costumes and I say, that's a bold choice for you. So
yeah, that's what makes the convention so much fun, though.
Oh, absolutely. And some of the work that people put into their costumes are just it's amazing to see, and the themes that they come up with. It's not just dressing up like somebody, it's getting all your friends together and coming up with a theme.
Yeah.
We saw an entire group of kids dressed as Toy Story characters, to the point where the guy who was the army man even had like the little base for his legs, which was pretty neat. Well, why don't I'm going to give everybody your bio real quick. Jeffery Kripal holds the J. Newton Razor Chair in Philosophy and Religious Thought at Rice University, where he's also the chair of the Department of Religious Studies. He's the author of Authors of the Impossible, The Paranormal, and the Sacred, as well as a number of other books as well. And of course, as we mentioned, the latest book is The Supernatural, A New Vision of the Unexplained, that he co-wrote with Whitley Strieber. And I got to tell you, Jeffrey, right off the bat, how does that work? How does a working relationship, writing a book with Whitley Strieber, work? Because we've had him on the show before, and how do you kind of take what it is that you do and compare it with his mind? Because his mind goes to all different kinds of places.
Well, that book is the result of a long sort of back history. I wrote a book in 2011 called Mutants and Mystics, which was on the paranormal in science fiction and superhero comics. And the last chapter is all about Whitley. And so when I was writing that chapter, I contacted him through a mutual friend and shared the chapter with him to try to get his sense of it, whether I had him accurate or not. And that sparked, a lot of correspondence and ultimately a friendship, and in the long term, ultimately this book. My own sense of Whitley is that he has all kinds of very sophisticated theories of religion and the paranormal kind of embedded or implicit in his books. And so what we tried to do in The Supernatural was pull those out and make them more explicit.
He certainly is an outside-of-the-box thinker in all different kinds of approaches, and it seems like you are as well. Just taking a look at some of the works that you have, I think we were talking before about taking anything at face value, and that a lot of folks are kind of taking things for granted in the paranormal now, to say that we know that if this happens and this happens and this must be true, when in actuality we don't really have any true definitions of any of it.
Right. We can talk all night about that, but I actually don't believe any of it. But that doesn't mean I don't think it's real or I don't think it's happening. It just means I don't find the mythical or religious or pop cultural frameworks in which people interpret it to be persuasive. So I think we need a great deal of suspicion, but we also need a great deal of sympathy at the same time.
Well, one of the things that I've felt over the years, and as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing this show now for, it'll be 12 years this January. And is that right, or is it 12? Yeah, 12 years. I got to do the math in my head because it's been so long. But, one of the things that we've realized is that people get complacent in their thinking. And this is a field of study where we should never be complacent, because things are ever evolving, and our understanding of these things that we're pursuing are ever evolving. So I don't understand why some people just kind of flatline and plateau at a point where they say, okay, I think I have an idea of what's going on, and now I'm just going to go out and lecture about this and write books about this and try to go out and have other people experience this, when in actuality, there's always, for every answer that you think you have, there's more questions that open up.
Right. The situation is even deeper than that. I mean, my own view, and I think Whitley's view as well, is that the paranormal is all about the gaps or the fissures in our worldview and in our categories, and it's all about confusing us. And if you think you understand the paranormal, you clearly don't, because it's about us abandoning our understanding or our categories.
See, I don't think it's a mistake that in the title of the book that the supernatural is not all one word with a small n. It's two separate words for a reason.
Right. That's the key point of the whole book. And of course, when you just say the title, people lose that. They think it's one word, supernatural, but it's actually two words. Yeah, I mean, the main argument of the book is that what people think of the paranormal or the strange or the supernatural is actually natural. It's part of our world. These things happen all the time. We do not have a scientific explanation for them. That does not mean they're not real. It simply means we're not there. And that we live in a world in which these things are perfectly natural. So we're trying to make that argument in the book, essentially.
I mean, it makes sense because there's a lot of things in the natural world that we don't fully understand as it is. I mean, we're finding, you know, especially getting into microbiology and microphysics, we're finding more and more things that are new information that we never would have thought of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And even just discovering new species on the planet from time to time as well. Like, we haven't mastered everything in what we think is the known universe. So why can we say that this is something that's supposed to be the unknown?
Well, and what I was trying to articulate is that actually for all of our science, we have only mastered the objective world. All of science is really just about objects in space. It eliminates subjectivity or consciousness to do its work, but we are conscious. We are forms of subjectivity, and all paranormal experiences engage those forms of consciousness. So they actually cannot be explained with the scientific method. They need other forms of knowing and other methods to even appear. And that was one of the sort of major critiques I was trying to issue in the book, is that we naively think that science will eventually explain everything, but it can't, because it eliminates consciousness to do its work. And again, the paranormal is all about consciousness. So that's essentially my critique in the book.
I mean, and that's, you know, no pun intended, but I think spooky action at a distance comes into play when you're talking about things involved in the paranormal. That, you know, it's not like you said, it has to be subjective. It has to be experienced for it to happen. I don't think that, and people always make this argument with me, well, what about all these surveillance camera footage where we see things moving around? But the point is, somebody was observing through that surveillance camera. The act of observation was there, and I think that that's the case. I don't think that this stuff happens in a vacuum. I think it needs to have the human element for it to take place.
That's right. That's exactly right. And, of course, there are physical traces, and there are physical dimensions to these experiences, but they only make sense in relationship to human actors and human observers.
And I think part of that, at least the way that I've been looking at it for a while now, is that part of that is, like you said, it's not just an objective, hard, scientific thing. I think a lot of it is emotional, and it's you can't quantify emotion, and so you can't quantify this stuff the same way you can't quantify love or fear or hate.
That's right. I mean, to take a simple example, the near-death experience. I mean, you don't get a near-death experience unless you have trauma. You have extreme emotion. You have extreme crisis. You often have a loved one that's in danger or dying, and all of that emotional energy, all of that love, all of that crisis is what catalyzes the near-death experience. And if you don't have those things, you've got no experience. You've got no event to study. And you can't get that in a scientific laboratory. It's not going to work.
And
so that's a difficult thing for people to hear, because I think many of us in the modern world think that science is the only way of knowing anything, and that if we can't establish something with the scientific method, it doesn't exist. But that's extremely naive and obviously false. And so I think we need to really, really query that assumption.
Well, my co-host here, Matt Moniz, is a scientist, and Matt, you seem to be having a reaction there. What exactly is?
Well, I find it funny because he is right. Science is only going to get you so far, especially looking at the paranormal. I mean, in science, you can set up all of these parameters. You can build the box, so to speak. But what happens in the box, we can only quantify up to a certain point. He's right. Once you start getting into the imposition of consciousness into it. My consciousness is different than yours, and
right.
Your interpretation. You can break it down into certain mathematical principles, but that only works so far.
And what's funny, Jeff, is Moniz has been doing this for a long time. He's been researching the paranormal long before he got involved with this show. And when he came in the early days, Matt, you were very much about the scientific method, and you were very much about trying to apply that to what it was that we were doing. And somewhere along the way, you've realized it's not working.
No, I realized that doing it, I can do it for myself. But what I don't like or didn't like, or how do I put this? What I find disconcerting in terms of doing things in a scientific principle is nobody's doing it in a standardized manner.
Right.
While looking into the paranormal. Everything's, going, which is fine. It's good to, have various points of data. But everybody's got to start off on the same page, and, that's how science works. It's dogmatic. It's in some cases boring, but you have to cover all of those bases. And right now we've got people going off in every which direction.
Right, of course. Jeff, can we all start looking at this from the same foot? I don't think that's possible because everybody's going to internalize the experience differently.
Right. So when I say that the paranormal is not amenable to the scientific method, that is no slight on the scientific method. I have profound respect and even reverence for science. But because I have respect and reverence for science, I know what is not scientific, and I also know what cannot be known through the scientific method. I mean, I work with scientists all the time. I know how science works quite well. And so the reason the paranormal is not amenable to the scientific method is it's all about human beings. It's all about individual subjects and whatever it is they need at a particular point in their life cycle. And often these events intervene within trauma or illness or danger or at some transition point in the life, and they're clearly designed to kind of send a message. They're about, in the language of the humanities, they're semiotic. They're about meaning. They work like text. They work like novels or films. They don't work like machines or mechanisms or causal systems. They work more like movies or novels. So if you talk to people who have had these experiences, they'll often say to you, "Wow, it was like I was caught in a novel, or I was a character in a movie," and of course they were, because that's what these things are about. They're telling us stories, and we don't understand what the stories are because we're the characters in the stories. We're the characters up on the screen, and so that's what I'm trying to say in this book is that, look, we can understand this, but we've got to use different methods, and we've got to think about these things more like novels or films or stories.
We've talked about this before. We've had a friend of ours, Ken DaCosta, on talking about this topic before. You, of course, study religion. That's your main forte. Do people look at the supernatural, the paranormal, these experiences, these things, through the same type of lens that they would a religion?
Well, it depends. That's a great question. It depends on the person. So the basic consensus in the study of religion is that strange experiences like this can be interpreted religiously, but they don't have to be. It depends on the individual or the community. But let me give you a simple example.
Sure.
Take poltergeist phenomena. So for centuries, from about the 16th century to the early 20th century, the poltergeist was assumed to be some kind of spirit or ghost that was angry or upset. So the German word means noisy ghost. And so things would explode or break or fly in the room, and people assumed these were ghosts. So they were giving it a religious spin. But in the early 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, what happened was that researchers began to look closely at these events, and they realized that they all seemed to orbit around single individuals, many of whom were adolescents and were often emotionally or sexually conflicted or being abused or in very difficult situations. And so they began to suspect that actually what was happening was that these emotional energies of this individual who was suffering were somehow exteriorizing into the environment and expressing themselves in symbolic ways. So the poltergeist is all about conflict and emotion and anger and frustration. So things blow up or explode or fly. The images are all symbolic of the emotional state of the focal agent. But what that meant is that we began to move away from a religious understanding of the poltergeist to a psychological or an emotional one. It was still strange beyond measure because we have no idea how an individual can unconsciously exteriorize emotions and make a picture fly across the room. That's equally bizarre. But at that point, we had abandoned the religious interpretation and had taken on a more psychological one. So that's just a long answer to your question. Well, we don't need to interpret these things religiously, but historically we have.
And what's funny is that some religious dogmas will allow for it, some won't. Some feel that the pursuit of the unknown is, God forbid, no pun intended, but, that you go into an abandoned house and try to make contact with the spirits of people who might have lived there or who may have died there. But yet, that might be what you do on a Saturday night. But then on a Sunday morning, you're in church where you're talking to the people who have no longer been with you and praying for them and praying to some omnipotent power in the sky. It's very strange that, one side of it is okay and the other side of it isn't. We are told that people go to this great beyond, to this other plane of existence, but trying to make contact with the other plane of existence becomes taboo for some reason.
Well, going to the church...
There's a very long history there. I mean, monotheism has had a very difficult time with what we call magic, or what we might call the occult or the paranormal. And the basic problem is that in monotheism, in the history of monotheism, you need to place all power and all miraculous abilities in God alone, not in human beings. And so when human beings attempt to access these abilities or attempt to study them in systematic ways, there's always this religious reaction that that's somehow inappropriate or bad or even evil. And I actually worry about that a lot because people who experience paranormal things are often literally demonized by religious communities. And they then internalize those judgments and have the experience in negative ways. So the interpretation actually ends up, I think, determining the nature of the experience. It's a kind of a loop effect. And so I actually worry a lot about that. And I think the more conscious we are of that, the more able we'll be not to do that, not to make those judgments.
But I think part of that, too, is the fact that with the monotheistic religions, and especially with the rise of Christianity, it's become the point where there's this one person, one human being that is as close to the divine as you can get, who is and obviously there's the hierarchy of the church, but whatever. It's the people that are in that position that are the intermediary between the regular people and God, and so therefore they're the only ones that have the ability to speak to and hear from God, and the rest of us kind of have to almost deify them here on earth as our own, kind of, demigod in that sense, where, it's more about the power of the person that's in that position than it is allowing the people to have a free communication with this greater spirit, this greater entity that they're supposed to be believing in.
That's right. So within the history of Christianity, at least, the only divine human being was Jesus. Nobody else can be divine. Nobody else can have these miraculous powers. And the word supernatural was actually basically invented in the 13th century. And it was invented to help with the legal process to determine who was a saint and who wasn't. And basically the reason they invented the word supernatural was to make this argument that when a saint or a holy person performs miracles, it's not really the person doing the miracle, it's God. It's something above the natural order. That's what supernatural means. So the whole category of the supernatural was created within this monotheistic context to place all paranormal power in God and to deny it all to living human beings. And that kind of resonates right down to the present, where, again, these things are basically demonized. So, like, I have a good parapsychology friend who always bemoans the fact that in all the movies Hollywood makes, the people with paranormal powers always end up getting killed or threatened. And that's a kind of echo of that monotheistic nervousness around these things.
Right. It's putting that taboo on the spiritual interaction the same way they put taboo on pagan rituals and pretty much any other belief system other than the one that they were promoting.
Right. Well, of course, paganism is the opposite of monotheism. Mm-hmm. Polytheism is the opposite of monotheism. The tricky thing about monotheism, though, is even in the Bible, there's lots of paranormal stuff going on. There's lots of people with these powers, but they tend to be ignored or put to the side, you know. And so the Bible is a very, very ambiguous set of documents when it comes to these things.
And from again, I'm no biblical scholar. Of course you are, but I'm not somebody who has studied religion at any great point. I have my own kind of beliefs of what I think and things that guide me. But at the same time, I've looked at some of these stories and said, I don't understand how anybody looks at the Bible and takes this as literal. I mean, as somebody from an outsider, it's a book of fables. It's a story to get a point across.
Right. So I had a professor in graduate school, and he used to say that all religious beliefs are unbelievable. And what he meant by that is that anyone standing outside that worldview looks in and says exactly what you just said. This is all fable. This is all completely unbelievable. But people within the worldview just assume it's truth and don't see that at all. It all depends on which worldview you're sitting in. And to go back to science, I mean, there are a lot of scientists who inhabit a scientific materialistic worldview, and they just assume the absolute truth of materialism. And they, in the same way that the Christian assumes the truth of the New Testament, or the pious Jew assumes the truth of the Torah, or the Muslim, the Quran, or whatever. So we all inhabit these worldviews, and to the extent that we're inside them, we don't question them. Once we move out of them, though, they're obviously not universally true.
That's the thing. I don't think any universal truth can be 100% infallible, because sometimes you move outside of that world. I mean, you move outside of the natural world, and all the natural truths that we think are true no longer
Why can't they all be true?
This is why you don't really want to think too hard, because it lands you in these quandaries. You suddenly become nowhere.
Well, I love thinking about stuff like this. I just keep a bottle of Advil nearby, because it's inevitable that eventually your head's just going to start to hurt trying to wrap your head around all this. So then if the belief that you're putting forth, the idea that you're putting forth in this book with Whitley Strieber is the idea that these things are part of the natural world that we just don't understand, and that they're... So let's just say that I'm the average Saturday night weekend warrior paranormal investigator. If I'm just somebody going out and doing, researching ghostly activity at somebody's house,
Right.
And I
okay.
have these experiences. What is it in your viewpoint that I'm having an experience with if I'm experiencing temperature drops, doors closing on their own, shadowy figures that I'm seeing with my own eyes? What is it that you're experiencing if this is all just kind of something that we just don't understand?
Well, no, I don't think it's just stuff we don't understand. I think it's real. But I think that what it is designed to do is confuse us and to open us up to new possibilities so that we can create new culture and new worldviews. So I think when someone goes into a haunted house and experiences a haunting, I think what's happening is they're encountering some aspect of the natural world that doesn't fit into our contemporary worldview, and that all of those things like temperature dropping or ghostly forms or doors shutting, all of those things are actually semiotic. They're meant to send signals to the human researcher. They're meaningful. They're inherently meaningful. But what they mean is never quite clear. And I think what we are being called to do is to interpret them, to create meaning, and to create new worldviews out of them. See, I think these things are catalysts or prods for us to create a new world, a new culture. I don't think they mean one thing.
And that's
I don't think these are like treasures buried in the ground that we just dig up and the same person will always find the same treasure. I don't think it's like that at all. I think that these things are co-created and that we're involved in their discovery and what they actually end up meaning.
And
if that makes any sense.
No, it
at
does
all.
completely, because that's exactly one of the things that bothers me the most about people who do quote unquote paranormal research is, again, I don't mean to keep referencing them as, Saturday night investigators, but that's what it is. It's like one time a week you might go out and investigate and have an experience, or once a month, however it is that you get out there, you get out and you have an experience, and this thing happens that blows your mind, that is something that you've never experienced before and something that you can't explain, and it changes your worldview, but kind of just for that Saturday night. And then when you wake up the next day, you go back to the same way of thinking that you always have before, and then maybe the next Saturday night you go out and have another one of these experiences, but it never seems to resonate with people enough beyond just, I know now that ghosts are real. Like, but what does that mean? You don't understand what that means. By saying that ghosts are real, that means that now you have to start throwing away all these other absolutes that you thought your entire life.
Right. But like this radio show is an attempt to keep processing it and not to let it just fall on a Saturday night, although we are talking on a Saturday night. So I think we have to keep talking about these things in public spaces and pushing people to take them seriously so that we can create a new world, as it were.
Well, in that regard, then, is the sudden influx over the last decade or so of paranormal media helping with that? Is having shows where people are running around in the dark looking for ghosts, does that help open up our worldview even more?
Well, I think it helps. I thought where you were going with that is television and film. I don't know. I mean, I think the paranormal, the things you're talking about there probably do help because it's people taking these things seriously. I'm not sure all of the television shows and the movies about the paranormal are helping. In some ways they are, because they keep it in front of us, but in other ways they're implicitly dismissing it because these are all forms of entertainment, and I think the cultural contract that we're signing on when we watch them is essentially, okay, we can think about these things, we can go to the movie or we can watch the television set, as long as we all sign on the dotted line that these are just fantasies. This is just entertainment. We're just entertaining you. There's nothing to it.
Well,
and as long as we agree to that, we can have as many films and television shows as we want about the paranormal. But the moment someone steps out in front of the screen and says, hey, I actually think this is real, these things happen, they just get the hell beat out of them. So I think we're in this weird situation where we're fascinated by the paranormal, but we can't yet take it seriously.
Well, I think part of the reason for that too, and full disclosure, I work on some paranormal television shows, so as a researcher, so it's kind of like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here a little bit, but I've been pushing for a long time to say, why do we have to make every episode scary? Why do we have to put people in a situation where they're going to be fearful? Because I think that continued perpetration of selling this as being something that is scary and a frightful situation, and putting in the scary music and having people say, what was that? All that kind of stuff. I think that keeping that fear going is holding people back from having their mind open to this even more.
I couldn't agree more. That's part of the demonization. That's a subtle form of demonization. You can only talk about the paranormal now if it's horror, if it's a horror movie, or it's the horror section of the bookstore. And this plays out very dramatically among abductees, by the way, and in the whole UFO world. So we have all of these abductees or these UFO encounters that were actually incredibly positive and even ecstatic and transcendent. And when they get framed by an author or enter a television show, they become scary. They become little bad horror films.
Well, I mean, your co-author is probably one of the cornerstones of that happening, though, through his experiences and what he shared.
But not all his experiences were negative.
Whitley
they became
really, really abused by the media, and particularly by originally South Park, believe it or not, but also by the general media. He was mocked. He was humiliated. He was made fun of. And really his only crime was he was being bluntly honest about what happened to him, some of which was very scary and some of which was really quite beautiful.
But that's the thing, is that the scary part, communion being the scary part, that's what everybody focused in on with Whitley, and they weren't following the journey that put him on, where all of a sudden later on, as he becomes more, I don't want to say comfortable with this because maybe you never do, but as it becomes more understanding of what's going on, he's gone from being this guy that's scared in a cabin in the woods to all of a sudden being somebody with a mindset that never could have existed had he not had these encounters.
Right, but even if you read Communion fairly and deeply, it's a profound book. It's not just a scary message. It's a hopeful message as well. You can already see both sides of the equation there. And you're absolutely right. As Whitley's journey continues, he really moves through this fear and this trauma into this transcendent space that is, fundamentally positive.
Of course, the book cover doesn't help at all. That's the one that I told Whitley this when we had him on the show. I was like, I love the book, but I just want you to know, as soon as I bought it, I ripped the front cover off. I couldn't look at it.
That was in some ways the most influential part of the book.
Right.
That's what really froze that image into the public imagination.
And Moniz, my co-host Matt Moniz, he's worked with a number of abductees, and we've talked about it in the past. Yeah. Some people, it's a terrifying, harrowing experience. Other people, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to them, and they can't wait to be taken again.
Yeah, a lot of the people that I've dealt with have had positive experiences. Not all of them. A lot of it starts off in a terrifying manner because it's unknown.
Right.
And then eventually, as things progress, you become more acclimated to it, and different facets of it start to develop. But
this is where, guys, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but this is where the study of religion is so valuable, because in the study of religion we talk about what we call the sacred, and the sacred is not the good. The sacred is not being nice. The sacred refers to this energy or this power in the environment that when it interacts with a human being evokes both terror but also awe and beauty. So it has this positive side and this negative side. And of course that's exactly what you see when you dig into the dirt here, get into the weeds here. hence your stories about the abductees.
Yeah. One of the things I learned is dealing with a lot of abductees. They're great people, and their stories, will vary,
Right.
from person to person. But the media all treats them the same way. It's
Yep.
they were taken in the middle of the night, and this happens. I worked with Bud Hopkins for a couple of decades. One of the things we found out statistically, the most common activity that a person is abducted in is while driving. Okay, so the reason they use the nighttime out of the bed, because that's the most scary stories that they can pull out. It's your vulnerable state. So that's puts the fear into people, and that's how the media exploits it.
We're not so much afraid when we're outside of the house driving around of being abducted as much as we are when we're in our own bed and in our safe space,
right,
where we think nothing can get us.
Right.
Playing on the fear.
Right.
Because I know when I tuck myself under the covers, nothing's supposed to be able to get me, right? That's how it works.
Well, except your wife.
Yeah, that little half a centimeter piece of blanket protecting you from all the monsters.
It still does. I don't care what you say.
Yeah, it has since age 6.
That and the nightlight. The nightlight will make everything go away.
Right.
It's funny too. I've realized this as we've gone along through because. We do events and we take people out into haunted locations, mainly as a way to keep history alive and to keep these historic places to help them generate some income, but also to have people experience their first touches and brushes with the unknown. And one of the things that I've noticed is that I will tell people that we're going to go down into the basement or we're going to go into the attic. We're going to go find a room where there's no windows and we can turn off all the devices and sit there in total darkness and total silence. And I've realized that's not something that people do anymore. Like their watches are coming on, their phones are coming on. They're not used to just sitting there and tuning themselves into their surroundings.
Right. The only time we do that, of course, is when we're asleep.
And when that happens, we're supposedly vulnerable to all kinds of influences because we're taking ourselves out of our normal, we're going up into those beta waves and kind of inviting anything else in that wants to involve itself. So when we were talking along the lines of some of the comparisons between belief in the paranormal and a belief in the religion, one of the things that I've heard happen from people who are both religious and non-religious is that they will say that there's no such thing as ghosts, that there's no such thing as dead people who are coming back, there's no such thing as quantum physics, as thought forms, anything like that. Anything that you encounter that you think is a ghost is demonic. It's something that's negative, it's something that's evil, it's something that's playing you to think that it's something else that it is. I don't see how that theory and that idea of an evilness can work in what it is that you're portraying the paranormal and the supernatural to be, because it doesn't seem like if it's natural, it shouldn't have this inclination. It shouldn't have this designation of being good or evil.
Right. I am by nature very suspicious of any language of evil or the demonic. I mean, I recognize that people have experiences that are profoundly destructive or terrifying, and that the language of the demonic or the language of evil is the only language that comes close to describing what has happened to them. But I'm deeply suspicious that there are evil spirits out there trying to trick us. I think when we encounter an evil or demonic entity, what we're often encountering is some aspect of ourselves or our culture that we've denied or walled off, and it's essentially haunting us like a dream haunts us, some aspect of ourselves that we need to deal with. So I mean, that's sort of my baseline orientation. I don't claim any omniscience or infallibility for it. That's what I see over and over again, that I see people encountering aspects of themselves that have not yet been integrated, and that those things are negative. Or people are being introduced or being taken up into some transcendent state. And to do that, their egos have to be temporarily taken offline or symbolically killed. And that's naturally terrifying. And they immediately interpret that as something demonic or negative, but in fact, it's not. It's just part of the process.
Well, I mean, getting back to the idea of subjectivity, and we've debated this here on the show before. I mean, good and evil are to some degree subjective. I mean, sure, there's a lot of mores that we look at as a society and say, okay, we think that these things are bad. We all can agree that killing another person is a bad thing. But evil and the degrees of evil are subjective because, you know, when you see somebody who is disturbed or however you want to put it and does bad things, they don't always see it as being bad. Somebody that goes out and kills people, like if somebody goes out and kills prostitutes, they think that they're helping the world by doing that. And so what we see as evil, they see as doing something good, and it's all very subjective.
Yeah. Yeah, I worry about the human capacity to fear the unknown and to label it as something negative or demonic. I just worry about that. And I see a lot of religious reasons to reject the paranormal, none of which I accept, but I understand where they come from. And I just worry about that because I think the paranormal at the end of the day is us. It's our potential that isn't yet actualized or integrated into our lives. And I think to demonize that just keeps it unintegrated, just keeps it down, just keeps it from being actualized. And that's what concerns me about it the most.
I mean, there are people who have been able to look at this, look through this lens over the years and be able to remove some of the stigmas and connotations that come with researching this. I mean, I know you wrote the book Authors of the Impossible, where you're looking at somebody like Charles Fort, and Charles Fort was able to look at this and say, hey, this stuff, it's happening in the natural world, and it does happen, and it doesn't have all of these meanings that we're assigning to it. If it rains frogs, it just rains frogs.
Right. Right. And of course, he arrived at his own sort of theories about what it was about, but he didn't hold any of them in absolute terms. He was very playful and very, very humorous about all of that. I'm a deep admirer of Ford, actually, because of that. But again, he was very suspicious of both religion and science. Those were the two dominants, as he called them, that had defined the world, and he was trying to move into this third dominant that hasn't yet taken shape. So he was a skeptic as well of people's willingness to believe this or that.
And one of the most fascinating things about him is that, you know, he was coming, people became aware of his work at a time when you were, in some ways, it was the post-spiritualist era where people are going in one direction or the other. You know, they were either true believers or true deniers, and there wasn't really enough of a gray area there, and he was willing to kind of work in that gray area to say, you know, it's happening, but we don't know why it's happening. It's happening, but we don't need to know why it's happening.
Yeah. And of course, again, he used humor to mock all of the quick answers about what it was or what it wasn't. So yeah, I think Fort's a real guide for us here. I wish more people would read him and take him seriously.
Well, it used to be that in terms of paranormal research, there was a good branch that was Fortian in its approach, but that's kind of gone to the wayside now as the social media paranormal community has become more popular, and it's just basically the people who are doing the research are the people that are copying what they're seeing on TV.
That's a mistake.
It does happen more often than not. I can't tell you how many times we go and do things with folks, and we'll have an event, and it's somebody's first time ever doing this, and they expect it to work just like it does on TV. You know, give you 15 minutes of history, 15 minutes to get acclimated and set up your equipment, and then by the half an hour mark, all hell's supposed to start breaking loose.
And they have no sense that the television show is produced and edited and manipulated.
No, what are you talking about? That doesn't happen. No. Well, and also the fact that it's taking, multiple hours and multiple days of footage and condensing it into this thing. I mean, we could sit around and wait forever for something to happen. And that's a question that I would ask you. If this is part of the natural world and something that is supposed to be occurring, why does it happen so infrequently?
Wait a minute. So you're saying those...
That's a great question. And so I do have an answer to that. My own feeling is that, we're generally put together quite well. The human being and the human ego are pretty solid. We're like containers. And the job of the body and the brain and the ego is to keep the world out and to only let a very small trickle in so that we can deal with that and sort of walk through the world and make a living and procreate and eventually die. But what happens in a paranormal event is that filter or that container somehow gets breached or compromised, and more of the world comes rushing in. And so the answer to your question is, the reason it doesn't happen more often is that usually the body, brain, and the ego are functioning properly and healthily, and they're able to keep all of this stuff out. But in moments of crisis or illness or death or what have you, in these sort of crisis points, that body, brain, and that ego are temporarily compromised, and the stuff comes rushing in. So I think that's a pretty good explanation for why it's relatively rare in any individual's life, but is actually extremely common when you look at a total population.
And if you're somebody...
Because of course, we all are ultimately compromised, and we all ultimately suffer and die. And of course, that's when paranormal stuff spikes, is around those events.
And it would also make sense then that when you are somebody who puts yourself in a position in your life where you're going to go out and look for this stuff, why you would have a higher number of experiences, because you're now in that mindset of looking for it. I've heard paranormal investigators say, I've been doing this for 20 years and I've had maybe one or two things happen to me that I can say are paranormal. Whereas I can say, hey, every time I go out, something happens. It doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong.
I think people are different. I think we're put together differently. I can tell you with complete confidence that Willie Strieber is not put together like Jeff Kripal. I'm kind of a dullard. I'm pretty thick. My body, brain, and ego are pretty stable and pretty thick. And so I don't experience the world as Willie experiences it, but I have absolutely no doubt that he does. I mean, I've been around him when he's done this, when he's had these experiences. He just interacts with the world in a completely different way than I do. He's a different being. And I don't know why, but he is. And so I think that's part of the answer here is we are not all alike. Certain of us are much more porous to the world than the rest of us. And I think once we recognize that, we can understand why these things are rare and why it's so important to look at these extreme experiencers as the real subjects of our research.
Well, one of the words that I hear used quite frequently to describe people just people in general, is I hear a resonance. Resonance, and I know that's something that Whitley has written about quite a bit, the idea of resonance, and that maybe there are just some people that are at a different frequency. So if that's said, then people should be able to kind of find a way to work their way through that ego and work their way through that limitations that they may have and get themselves into that higher resonance.
Well, ideally, but of course that's not the case. I mean, this is why all religious systems posit something like this. They posit this ability for human beings to access some some way to experience the transcendent or ultimate reality. But once they do that, they then have to explain why the rest of us don't. And so they come up with all these theories about why the rest of us don't. So I just think this has been a problem from day one for the species, is that a few of us have easy or almost natural access to these other states and these other dimensions, and the rest of us don't. And that might be a good thing. I mean, maybe there's some survival or evolutionary purpose to our dullness. I suspect there is, but I don't actually know. I don't know.
I do think, though, that I have seen it myself. I've seen people who have gone into investigations with us, into events with us, and been very close-minded to it, and had their mind opened up by an experience, and have been willing to say, okay, this kind of changes. This is a game changer for me. But
right.
I think people just don't know what to do when that game has changed. They don't know how to play by those new rules anymore. And so it's kind of just like, I think I'm more open now, but you're not really living in a way that makes you more open.
If you don't have a model to place the new data or the new experience, you will drop or forget the new experience. And that's the importance of what I earlier referred to as creating culture. Is we have to create a culture or a new worldview in which these things can find a home. Otherwise, they'll just remain weird, anomalous things that have no home, and we'll just keep ignoring them.
So I'd like to be one of those people that helps to create that type of a culture. How do I do that? How do we make that culture happen?
Well, I would say you are doing that. And isn't that what this radio show's about?
Hopefully. That, and we talk a lot about snacks too, but for the most part, we're trying to open those minds. Yeah, we talk a lot about snacks.
Okay. Well, that's a different project.
Right. And as far as we're concerned, it's all tied in. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
But one of the things, like, because a good friend of mine is a gentleman named John Tenney, and I don't know if you've ever been able to come across him in his work, but he's somebody who, when he was a teenager, he said, I'm going to go down this path of investigating all things that are weird and unusual, and he has just lived now his life surrounded by the weird. And not only when he's going through his day-to-day life do all these strange, unusual, and almost impossible things happen to him, but when you come into his orbit, they start to happen to you as well. And I think that is exactly what you're talking about, that when you're putting yourself in a position to say, okay, this guy John Tenney seems like a regular, normal person, and I respect his stories of these things happening, so they must be true, and then therefore you're going to go out and have the same weird experience. I think that it does kind of create that culture, and it does create that mindset, and you can stay in it as long as those things keep happening and as long as you keep paying attention to them.
Yeah, and that's what I meant earlier when I said these are not objects in three-dimensional space that anyone can find and measure and agree on. It depends on the person interacting with the world. And if you enter that zone or that state of consciousness that John possesses or lives in, then these things start to happen, because that's what they're about. They're about that state of consciousness. They're not about some treasure in the ground.
And one of the folks in our chat room, Scott, just mentioned, he'd like to do an investigation without any devices. And I think that's one of the things that's causing the limitations of people's mindsets opening up, is that we're so hung up on the idea of we have to prove what it is that's happening with some sort of data that we can back it up with, that we have to have some sort of meter that can measure the environmental changes, or some sort of device that can record the experience and be able to share it back with people. And I think that that's actually what's limiting us more than anything, is we're not just going in there and letting it happen.
Well, bear in mind, what is the equipment being brought in for? I tell this to people all the time. It isn't so much to document the experience. The equipment is just an augmentation of your natural senses.
But
your EMF meter works like your skin does, measuring, electromagnetic fields and galvanic response. Your audio recorder listens into frequencies your ears can't hear. Your IR cameras look at, nanometer ranges your eyes can't pick up and stuff like that.
But people have this refusal to believe that they can go and have an experience and then go share that experience with somebody else and have that person believe their experience. It's like, I'm going to tell you the story, and then I'm also going to show you how these lights lit up. And I'm also going to show you this piece of footage of video that I caught, or play for you this recording that I picked up, because we just can't believe each other enough when we're sharing the experiences themselves, and those devices are getting in the way.
Right. Well, again, so what they're assuming is that the only way to know something is through, again, the scientific method or through a set of technologies or machines. And that's important. I don't want to dismiss that. But again, if paranormal phenomena are about both the objective physical world and the forms of human consciousness interacting with it, then we're never going to actually understand these things unless we take into account those forms of consciousness. And I would also argue that the ultimate piece of paranormal technology is actually the human body brain. The human being is by far the most sensitive instrument ever invented. Nothing we've invented as a species comes close to the human being as essentially a paranormal piece of technology.
It's funny because I feel we say the same thing all the time, and when we do these events, we lay out all the equipment on a table. Yep. Everything from old school dowsing rods to the latest meters and devices and gadgets and gizmos. And we always say to people, out of all of this, out of everything that you see in the room, what do you think is the one thing that's specifically made to measure the paranormal? And people will point to all the different devices. And we tell them, no, the answer is you. You're the only one that can accurately experience the paranormal. None of these things, they're just supposedly there to quantify the byproduct of it.
Augmentation.
But they also might be, the machines might be useful as permission.
Mm-hmm.
So like take the dowsing rod. I mean, I don't think the dowsing rod does anything in itself, but when a dowser uses it, he or she is accessing his own clairvoyant or telepathic abilities, and the rod is just like this kind of, forgive the phrase, fake technology to access his or her own abilities. And I wonder if the machines might actually help in the same way. They give people permission,
but they
to access their own abilities, unconsciously, of course.
Right. You see the lights start to light up, and then you become more open to the idea that, okay, then something is happening, and then you can experience a little better yourself. I mean, for that reason alone, I'll keep buying AA batteries and putting them in there. AAA batteries in most of my stuff. But
device divination.
Who knows? We might actually invent a machine someday that can pick this stuff up.
Well, there have been proposed machines in the past that are supposed to just be amplifications of the human. I'm thinking of, there was the
Spiricom.
No, even before that, during the spiritualist era, there was Koons invented the spiritual machine, which was supposed to be this big device that he was going to put his son in, and his son was going to be this great medium, and this would just kind of amplify his mediumship abilities. Yeah, I mean, I actually just read about that, and my sense of that again is that was just, it's kind of like a placebo. It's allowing them to access the abilities that they already have. Mm-hmm.
Well, you could make the same connection like with Wilhelm Reich and Orgone Energy, putting people in accumulators.
Yeah, the good old Orgone box.
Yeah,
I think that anything like that, though, that can get people considering the possibility is helpful, because I've been in rooms where there's hardened skeptics and even hardened cynics that aren't going to accept anything that happens to them and see something in them change when something happens. I've seen other ones who haven't. I've seen true believers who have gone the other way because they've gone somewhere and something hasn't happened, and they said, gee, maybe this stuff isn't real.
Well, again, I don't think there's a question of whether it's real or not, but that it's always relational. And that's why again, pure objectivity doesn't work, because it's all about the subject and whether the human being is open to that or needs that at that particular moment in space and time.
And by accepting the fact that the world is more super and more weird than we ever thought that it might have been, it kind of makes, I would think there's kind of an inverse effect too, a little bit, to make you more respectful of the things that we can understand. So the things that we do have a handle on, the things that, you're kind of glad that with all the things that we don't understand in this world, at least we have this. At least we have some things that we feel are grounded in, I hate to use the term reality, but at least it's grounded in something that we can know and reach out and touch. And it kind of makes you more appreciative of what it is that we have mastered and have learned.
Yeah. I guess, I love things like this. I love UFOs. I love weird, strange things. And I think I love them because I don't understand them. And what they finally mean for me is that the world is much bigger than me and much bigger than anything this human species has figured out yet. And I just find that delicious. I find that wonderful.
I'd hate to live a life where I didn't have any more questions.
Yeah.
What's that?
I'd hate to live the rest of my life not having any more questions.
Yeah.
I always want another thing to reach out for.
Out. Yeah.
Although that being said, what do you think that UFOs are? What if you had a hazarded guess? Because this is one of the big debates that we always have on this show, is what are these things?
Well,
I mean, knowing Whitley and knowing his experiences, that gives you a little bit more of an insight than some of us might have.
That's a big question. Well, I don't know how deeply you read into the supernatural, but in the introduction, I talk about what I call the wastebasket problem, and it's an answer to your UFO question. I think what we call UFOs are actually a lot of different things that we confuse and that we throw in this wastebasket called UFO. So I think in that basket there are probably secret government military operations. There are probably hoaxed UFOs in there. There are certainly genuine encounters with aerial phenomena that have no explanation. There are abduction phenomena. There are crop circles, fake or real. All these things get thrown in this wastebasket and then shook. And we can't understand it because we're actually looking at completely different things. That's kind of my weak answer to the question. My strong answer is that I suspect that UFOs are finally something spiritual. And by that I don't mean religious. I don't think they can be framed in any known religion, but that they have something to do with the human soul and something to do with ultimate purpose in life. And we interpret them or experience them as machines today because we live in a machine age. We live in a mechanistic, materialist age. And we often hear of the extraterrestrial invasion because the UFO emerged in the Cold War and within a mythology of invasion. But that all of those are inadequate finally, and that they're finally something spiritual that's trying to happen.
Archetypes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I use the Jungian thing. Jung wrote a very prescient book about UFOs, the Flying Saucer book, and he, of course, invoked archetypes, but I'm not quite invoking archetypes here. But I suppose it is resonant with what Jung was trying to say in that late book of his.
See, I like the wastebasket theory myself because I figure that at some point I can dump all those theories out and just put the wastebasket on my head, and then the UFOs can't read my thoughts. That's why I was a fan of it. But there, I mean,
good luck with that, by the way.
There's so many things that when you look at them from the perspective of, okay, let's just say if and then, like if we were willing to accept more of the if and get to that and then, I think it almost kind of works backwards, that we can really start to figure things out if we just kind of accept that these things are real and accept that they're true. Then we can reverse engineer the reasons why and reverse engineer the answers to our bigger questions, like Bigfoot. If there is a Bigfoot out there, why haven't we found a carcass? Why haven't we found enough of a smoking gun to prove that they exist?
Well, I think the Bigfoot sightings are probably finally spiritual as well, or occult, if you want to use that language. I doubt there's a species out there we haven't discovered, but I have no doubt that people have experienced, big hairy people in the forest.
I love my friend Greg Newkirk puts it best. Bigfoot is a ghost.
Bigfoot is what?
Bigfoot is a ghost. They have T-shirts that say that even.
Yeah, I mean that would be pretty much what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Moniz, I know that you've been doing a lot of Bigfoot research.
I was going to say
lately.
the plaster casts I have at home would beg to differ.
But how is that any different than if there's things that are left behind from ghostly activity too? There's things that we can find that no different than doing a plaster cast.
So ghosts have physical effects in the environment, and of course, I don't doubt that people find Bigfoot prints on the ground either. But UFOs leave marks on the ground too, and burn marks, and
yep, I've analyzed most
grass
of
and all kinds of stuff. So this is what I meant by the paranormal. It always has this physical dimension to it, but it's never quite enough to prove anything. And there's always this subjective element or this human element that's part of the equation.
And maybe these physical signs are, like you said, just giving us enough for us to keep asking the questions and paying attention to it.
Well,
it's not going to add up to anything.
Yeah, I mean, they give us enough that we can't land in a purely subjective or mental explanation, like they're just hallucinations. They're not just hallucinations. They're not. But they never give us enough that we can say, oh, there's an actual species that we've now discovered, or there's a machine that landed on the White House lawn. That never happened. So we can't fall into the physical and completely empirical explanation, and we can't fall into the mental, purely hallucinatory explanation. We're always caught in the middle.
It's almost like I hate to try to simplify things more than they need to be, but it's almost like saying, the donkey and the carrot, that the donkey keeps chasing the carrot, but he can never quite get it. But what ends up happening is the donkey crosses quite a bit of distance trying to get to that carrot. So even though we're never going to get that carrot, we're on a journey as we're doing it. We're going quite a distance as we're trying to get it, and we're never going to get it, but at least we have gone so far from where we were before.
Well, what if we just stopped looking for it as an object, and we stopped looking for it or demeaning it as just a subjective hallucination, and just sat in the middle of all of that and just listened? That's essentially the answer of the book with Whitley. Is in Whitley's language, the secret is to sit with the question and not to fall into some easy answer.
Absolutely. I couldn't think of a better way to leave it than that. Well,
good.
Jeff, let everybody know where they can follow along with your work and how they can get the book and all of your books.
Well, so my books are all available on Amazon. You just type my name in and they'll all pop up. But you can also go to my website where they're all summarized. I don't sell anything on my website. It's a strictly academic website. It's at kripal.rice.edu. And there I summarize the books and the larger project in which they're all chapters.
Well, we thank you very much for joining us, and I know it's terrible to have to say this, but the way that a lot of people look at things, by having an academic that pursues these topics and looks into these topics and can talk about them in a way that makes it all make sense for people, it helps us. So thank you for doing what it is that you do, when I know that it's probably something that a lot of academia kind of raises an eyebrow at you for going down that path.
Well, yeah, some of them do and some of them don't. You'd be surprised. There's a lot of enthusiasm for it here as well. But I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I think it's important work. So thank you too.
Thank you very much. You have a great night, and I definitely hope that we get to speak with you again.
All right.
I promise no technical problems next time.
Right. Okay, no problem. Don't worry about it.
I can't. You can't hold me to that. All right. Okay, have a great night.
Bye-bye.
That is Jeff Kripal. And again, as he mentioned, you can go to his website. It's kripal.rice.edu. You can find all of his information there. You can find his bio. You can find some essays. You can find all the different projects that he's worked on. I got to say, it's one of my favorite discussions that we have ever had on this show.
Very knowledgeable, very, very, very good guy.
And it's not a conversation that you can say, okay, well, I think I know where this conversation's going, and I understand, this. So many different ways. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this again and again, and kind of digest some of the ways that we were going. And it's what I liked about it is it's not just the what, it's the why. It's the why and why it matters, which is I think the stuff that's not being addressed enough with what it is that we do here.
Well, he was able to articulate himself very well. I mean, he wasn't overbearing with religiosity. A lot of we've had a few people that we've run into that I think religion gets a little ahead of them.
Well, I think when somebody studies religion,
yeah, they're
able to keep it at a little bit of a there's an arm's distance between it.
Right.
And I think that helps. And it's one of the things that we've actually been missing in a lot of the discussions that we've had over the years is having somebody that has a wide-ranging knowledge of religion. And we didn't really even start to get into that with him. Like, we could do a whole other show just on the religious implications of the paranormal. We touched upon a little bit there, but how different cultures and different belief systems process it.
Right.
Oh, just so many different ways to go. Such a great guest. And kudos to Chris for setting all that up. That's just, again, one of my favorite discussions. And it made me think of something that I actually was talking with somebody about just recently. I was talking about, with my friend Nick, we were discussing some of the different stuff that we've done. I think it was Nick. We were talking about some different things that we've done media-wise over the years. And I happened to mention probably the first time you and I ever went on television to promote Spooky Southcoast. So we're talking 2006, maybe early 2007. We did that show, The Rational Individualist, with Steve Grossman.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that
studio
today.
Over there. I was thinking about it just the other day, and I was reminded of it in this discussion where we go in and we sit down, very amicable conversation, very, very jovial. And as soon as we sat down on the set and the camera started rolling, it turned into an attack.
Yep.
And the very first thing that this gentleman said to Matt Moniz is, Matt Moniz, my first question to you as a chemist, as a scientist, what are you doing looking into the paranormal? And your answer was, my job. And it just kicked off an entire 30 minutes of hostile discussion from there. But it was, at the end, we're all in the parking lot being friends again. But it was very much, that mindset of, why are you paying attention to this? Why are you wasting your time with this? And you saying, but if you open your mind to it, it makes a whole world of difference. And it's the same thing that we were talking about here with Jeff Kripal.
Well, it's like I told people in the past, going through school and things like that, teachers would be, why are you interested in this? And there's nothing to this. Okay, here's $100 bill. You show me an unbiased study that conclusively proves something one way or the other, you get to keep it. If not, at the end of the week, if you can't find one, you owe me $100. It's the 800-pound gorilla that, science, has basically not looked at. It's like, I don't want to look here because if I do, there's going to be questions I can't answer. And
speaking of questions that you can't answer, I'm not going to ask you why, as a student, you had $100 bill in your pocket that you could just throw out there. And I'm sure you had a newspaper route. That's why, folks. It was the 80s. It was a different time.
Yeah, I'll leave that as that. But
this again, I'm going to go back and listen to this one on podcast, and you can as well. We'll have it up on the podcast feed. We'll have it up on the YouTube. What am I? What am I, 80 years old? Oh, you kids in the YouTube! It's just going to ruin you. But we'll fix it after a little bit of a technical difficulty there. I will no longer come on and rah-rah cheerlead for how awesome that we've done with technology, because technology likes to slap me back in the face when I do that. So I won't do that next time, I promise.
I know why and who did it.
Who did it?
I'll tell you off there.
Okay. And before we go, we've had a lot of fun, and we've talked about a number of different things, but we want to take it to a serious turn for a minute, because we did lose a member of the Spooky Southcoast family this week.
Yeah, we lost Michael Lucky Lakowiak. He died a couple of days ago of a heart attack or complications.
Very surprising.
Yeah, last person in the world I ever would have thought.
If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say the guy probably did 100 miles a week on his bike.
Correct. He was a sponsored marathon bicycler, and it was a shock to everybody. Yeah.
And the fact that it happened so suddenly, so quickly. We didn't really even share any information about it because, obviously we're seeing all the information from friends and family, but it's a private thing. We don't want to be putting things out into the Spooky South Coast audience, but there is an effort underway, and we're limited here on the radio how much we can talk about it in terms of that, just because of some of the rules and regulations of how we promote things here. But obviously we know that the Spooky South Coast audience is very generous, very giving, very loving, and this is one of your own that we have lost, because Lucky was part of this from the very beginning.
Very well known in the East Coast, and he helped with a lot of different shows. Most people don't realize he was an illustrator as well as a photographer, and he did stuff in the background that most people don't.
But I mean, he was also somebody that we've had here as a co-host and as a guest. And if you go back into past episodes, you'll find him. One of my favorite moments with Lucky was when we did the War of the Worlds episode, and he called in from New Jersey, and literally he was like the only part of the story that was true.
Yeah,
because he actually was in New Jersey because he lived there. So we are going to have it up on our website for everybody to take part in, for everybody to, if you want to make a donation to this fundraising cause to help out with the expenses, because again, it was sudden. The last person in the world you would expect to have something like this happen to, because he was so very active and just, I mean, there's no other way. He's very alive.
Yeah.
There was no other way to put it. And so also, it also goes to show that, you never can tell. So it does make every moment of every day important. It does make you realize that you have to appreciate every moment that you're given. So for all the moments that you're happy that you have, and all the moments that you're happy are coming forward, throw a couple bucks that way and help that family out, because again, nobody's thinking for a 42-year-old guy, we have to start planning final expenses, especially somebody who was so full of life. So we'll have that up on SpookySouthCoast.com tomorrow. If you want to make a donation, we appreciate it. We will be back next week for another episode of the show, and I think we'll be back pretty much every week. There's not a lot of stuff that'll be keeping us from coming in here and talking about the paranormal. So until next week, for Matt, for Chris, for Stephanie, for Ashley, I'm Tim. We want you all to stay spooktacular.